want to say, I think I thanked you, sorry. Our next speakers are Mark Sauter, Bill Sowles, and they're going to be investigating the fates of U.S. POWs behind the internet lines in North Korea, Russia, China, and Southeast Asia, sorry. And a brief bio on both just would be for our Facebook friends. Mark Sauter, POW MIA investigator and author whose exposés have been cited by media from the New York Times to Wall Street Journal. Mark. And Bill, son of Korean War POW MIA and activist who spent decades fighting to get answers for his family and others. Thank you.
Nicolette is the deck on this one.
Oh, here.
And by the way, a great choice for Activist of the Year, Unsung Hero here. And by the way, I'm only talking about live POWs, evidence of live POWs, and the family members of Americans kept by the communists today in my purpose.
Well, I have a clicker if you want to use the clicker.
Sure. So Bill Sowles, as you know, is a hero and a co-founder of the NAF after it's been 30 years, and his father's a missing hero from the Korean War. So today I'm going to talk about the efforts of the POW Investigative Project to find live POWs, evidence of POWs who were kept after these wars and may have died since, and also to make contact with the families of Americans I believe were kept in some of these countries and had children. And our missing hero may have died, but his family may still be alive for a variety of reasons we'd like to find those people. So we're going to talk about two things. It's going to take about 15 minutes. One is we're going to talk a little bit, just quickly review the declassified information on unrepatriated U.S. POWs. The reason I'm interested in these documents, I have an interest in the historical record. Roger Hall's efforts have unleashed a fantastic trove of research. But I'm focused on information from the documents that can help us find out about living POWs and POWs who were kept alive. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we're focused on getting that information from behind the lines in North Korea, China, Russia, the former Soviet Union, and Southeast Asia countries such as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Okay? And you'll get a basic sense of what we're doing by looking at those languages up there. We intend to use digital technology to reach the people who have the answers in their own languages where they live. This is something the Pentagon refuses to do that we're doing instead. So 30 years of NAF, obviously I can't come here without feeling sad about Dolores. And one quick moment of levity, I'll never forget early on in the efforts, Bill, I'm sure was there, as well as Janella. The guest of honor was Senator Jesse Helms. Who here is, anybody here familiar with Senator Helms? Great, so he was a very powerful and conservative and humorous senator from North Carolina who at one point became head of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, and he came up and he was very helpful to the Alliance and the POW families. And so I came to the event, and I always find these events a little depressing, to be frank, and solemn, although I'm always inspired by the strength all of you represent. But Jesse Helms was there, and I thought it was going to be a very serious and dry conversation. And he started off by saying, thank you very much for having me here. And I just want to let you know that Senator Ted Kennedy sends his regrets, couldn't make it here this morning because he couldn't find his pants. So why are we doing the POW Investigator Project? That's because we know they kept our POWs. We know they kept, some of them may be alive, God willing, but their remains are there. We need to get that information to the families and the American truth, get the truth out to the American people, and the government refuses to do much of what's necessary, as Sue was mentioning, and was being discussed. Their focus is not on the POWs who were kept alive. Time is running out, if not us who, if not now when. This political cartoon, the Vietnam veteran, who's a well-known newspaper cartoonist, has allowed us to use this. And we've been using this now for almost 30 years. But it's true today as it was then. Who am I? I've been basically working on investigating the POW issue now for 30 years. I got started by, among others, Bill Sowles. So I suppose this shows that I'm devoted but not very effective. So at the end of the Korean War, and this needs to be shown in the last known alive discussion, we know by name, we know hundreds of Americans were taken away, never returned, probably kept, and the reports are for many years after in the Soviet Union and other places. But we know by name, for instance, the Ashley 5 was an air crew which was being held by communist guerrillas who were pretending to be pro-U.S. And the U.S. intelligence was speaking to them on the radio on a regular basis and actually spoke to them at the time that all Americans were supposed to have been returned. And the declassified documents state very simply, these 5 Americans were alive when repatriation was supposed to occur and were not. And the communists had never accounted for them or any of the other people you see here who were known to be in their hands but never. This is Major Sam Logan. Has anybody here heard about Major Logan? Let's see if we can get his video. Do you all see the video? There he is. Color video, Korean War, being held by the North Koreans alive. The Soviets were also there with him and actually put out a picture of him on the Soviet, what's the equivalent of the Associated Press news service.
Monday.com is a team management tool that changed my life because my day used to be wasted on the marketing, carefully reminding Jessica of.
So now, can you help me get this thing back up? So a picture of Sam Logan in communist hands was sent around the world by the Soviets in real time after they captured him. So there is absolutely no doubt, thank you, that Major Logan was captured. His sons are still trying to find out what happened to him because the communists said they had no idea what happened to him. They didn't know anything about it. Obviously, photographic evidence, they were lying. I personally think he was taken to the Soviet Union with a number of other people captured at this time. Captain Harry Moore, this is an incredible story. He went missing in Korea, was declared dead. His brother married Harry Moore's widow and had a family. And then in the 1990s comes a document from the Pentagon that says, oh, by the way, it appears that he was captured alive and may have been taken to the Soviet Union. And since then, they've been stonewalling his family. The family is now suing the feds for information, and that's what I just mentioned, where they're not being very helpful, basically. Here's one of my personal heroes, and that's Sergeant Louis Sowles, Bill's dad, who is one of, we talked about people we knew the communists kept after Korea. A lot that we suspect that they kept because we know there were trains that took Americans to the Soviet Union. We don't know all their names, but we have a sense of who they were by height of a person and time period. But then we have about 4,000 out of the 7,000 plus that just totally disappeared. And the communists are essentially doing nothing to help us find out. Bill's dad was one of them. So were those the guys on the trains that went to the Soviet Union? Could they be some of the Americans who were reported alive in North Korea in the recent years or kept in China? Bill, I just think it's still, after all these years, it's really, we don't know. So one of the things that we do in this project is the whole project is based on finding people who actually have the answers. Not archivists in the government, not some family affairs representative at DPAA. So you'll see on the upper right, we have had Oh Young Nam interviewed in Seoul. He was a policeman who, when he came out, among many other things, he provided to U.S. and South Korean intelligence, said, oh, by the way, I don't know if you think this is interesting, but I visited several times the place where we kept our American POWs. And in fact, I took beer to them. And he said there were 20 to 30 elderly, white and black U.S. POWs. Very important because there were 5 U.S. defectors to North Korea, none were black. He last saw them in 1993, drew a map where they lived. Now, in the typical Pentagon way, the Pentagon says that he does not have firsthand proof because while he saw, they do believe he saw 30 elderly white and black guys, he doesn't speak English. Oh yeah, no. So he could not speak to them in English. So the reason that he thought they were POWs was the other policeman told him in Korean, these are the American POWs. So they just buried this report, have done essentially nothing about it. Documents show that when this came out, the head of the Korean POW section, whom we know, said, we have to act on this right away. We have to make a diplomatic demarche to North Korea. We have demand to be taken there, have our investigators go there and take their report. They never did. I've corresponded with, in the DMZ in North Korea, there are militaries representing neutral nations that try to keep a war from breaking out. And one of those guys, a lieutenant colonel in a friendly nation to ours, emailed me and said, look, my North Korean liaisons, we were chatting, and I said, do you have any minorities in North Korea? He said, none except for the American POWs. A couple hundred South Korean POWs captured 1950 to 53, when our guys were captured, are still alive in North Korea. 80 of them have escaped. And in recent years, and they had to take their names off the equivalent of their Vietnam wall. We arranged for some families of U.S. Korean War POW MIA to meet with them. And we also will be seeing next month the family group that represents all the civilians that the North Koreans taken out. Took away in 53, never a word heard. So the bottom line on Korea is several years ago, the government says none of this ever happened, they were all returned. I found this, a CIA document. The chief of staff of the Air Force, a guy named General Twining, who's a very famous general, wrote a letter to the CIA and said, this was a year after the war, and said, oh, by the way, the communists kept a large number of American POWs from Korea, can you help us rescue? And the CIA basically said, we don't have that capacity. Classified the document, it was kept secret for 6 years. Cold War POW MIA, this is sort of an unsung group of people. We had some of their family members at an alliance meeting several years ago. These were guys who were on airplanes that flew by the Soviet Union and China to get intelligence. A number of those planes were shot down, and there were strong indications that a number of these guys were captured, and in some cases by name. You'll see there Smith and McClurry were captured. The smiling guy in the middle, his wife, had no idea that there was evidence that he had been captured. She actually looked at a book that I co-wrote in the bookstore at Barnes & Noble, and that was the first time she ever found out the government had been told. She went to China with Donald Rumsfeld, and in the conference room they said, we have no idea what you're talking about, and then in the hallway, the senior Chinese official said, we're never going to tell you that. So they were alive. Southeast Asia. How many of you have seen these pictures in the middle of the two locations? Anyone seen those? Okay. So there was a very famous defector called the Mortician who defected from Vietnam to us, and he brought information that the Pentagon was warehousing hundreds of U.S. remains to sell activists. Now, what he also said that the government kept classified was, oh, by the way, when I was going to my office, there were 3 Americans who worked in the office who were servicemen from Vietnam. So they had identikits done. What did these guys look like? And there were originally 3 identikits. They gave him a polygraph. He passed with flying colors. Everything he said about the remains was true. Fantastic source. So there were the 3 Americans. Lo and behold, Bobby Garwood, you guys may have heard of him, comes out, and he was one of these three. So here are two Americans known alive in a specific office, not an office building, a specific room, and the U.S. government has never got the Vietnamese to tell us who they were. By the way, the mortician told us that he had been told repeatedly about a group of about 30 other Americans who were working at the airport on jet engines. You know, the documents that Rogers, yeah, go ahead.
Were those two Americans identified?
They were never. Bill Bell thought that.
Yeah, right.
Thought that one of them might have been a civilian helicopter repairman, Jane's son, but they never were identified for sure. And the U.S. never went to the Vietnamese and said, "These guys were in this specific office for years. Who the hell are they?" They never did. So we still don't know who those two were. There have been lots of documents that have come out, including some I find fascinating about the U.S. negotiating for quote-unquote breathers. This is in the 80s, U.S. POWs. Some of Rogers' documents talk about the U.S. believed several senior U.S. officials believed there were living POWs that we were negotiating. We continue to get in these documents. That's not our main focus, which I'll come to in a second. But on the upper right, so the government says no POWs were left in Korea. Here's a document from the year after the war, and there's a series of these that were so secret, they were only declassified, and we found them about 3 years ago. And what is it? Secret U.S. missions putting in Koreans and Chinese to look for the POWs in North Korea. We see these Vietnam documents that are coming out. There's just, in my mind, there's just no doubt it's coming out. Now, we have found in our project that I'm going to tell you about some interesting information. We are now getting contacts from inside Vietnam, which we'll discuss. We had a volunteer in Seoul, South Korea recently who was shown a stolen information from North Korea from the detectors in South Korea that had information which we think could relate to U.S. POWs. And we continue to get, all sorts of interesting information, some of which we have a man who works for us in Russia, and we have to be very secretive about him because he's a former Soviet dissident. And whenever there's an election, the Soviet secret police come to harass him. And so he has to move from Russia to the Ukraine back and forth. And for instance, he's been in touch with an academic who studies the Gulag, who said, I know where 4 Americans from the Korean War were in the Gulag. And we're working on that. And finally, we found these infuriating documents. There are 2 of them. As you all probably know, when there was the Soviet Union controlled a whole bunch of countries, like Latvia, in effect controlled Poland, had other countries like Kazakhstan were part of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet KGB and the GRU, which is military intelligence, had officers from these different countries. So there were Polish people, there were Latvians who worked for the KGB, went to Moscow for training, were sent around the world. When the Soviet Union broke up, it turned out that many of these guys hated Russia and hated the Soviet Union. For instance, they wanted Latvia to be free. Now that Putin is doing all this bad stuff, they hate Moscow. In at least 2 occasions we found, they came forward to the U.S. government with information on POWs. In one case, the guy said, I'll tell you exactly where 4 American POWs were living in the 1970s in the Soviet prisons. I just want to get this off my chest. In the other case you'll see there, he said, I read books in the secret KGB archives that could only have come from Korean and Vietnam War POWs. I believe this indicates about 800 Americans from Korea and dozens, if not more, from Vietnam. Now here's what the government has done. They censored the names of these people. So they got these reports, never did anything about it, and then when they released them, censored their names so we can't find them. Now, we're trying to find them, but that's another example. The Pentagon Catch-22. The Pentagon keeps what they call generic files, meaning a report of American POWs alive, but not by name. Right? The other ones are case files, which they keep secret in a different way. But for this, it's, I saw 20 Americans after the war in this specific place. They try to debunk every one of those reports, as I think Sue was getting at. But the ones they can't debunk, they keep classified while they're investigating them. And I call this the Pentagon Catch-22. And here's why. The first report from Vietnam in this category was from November 1979. And the Pentagon is still keeping it secret, saying that it's still investigating it. So what do you think's in that report? I have a suspicion. Same thing with Korea. So this is their way of never releasing the quote-unquote best reports of groups of Americans. So we decided to do something about it. The POW Investigative Project, do we have those cards somewhere? Guys, maybe someone could hand them out.
I will.
It's a nonprofit in Maryland. We're going to apply for federal nonprofit. All volunteers, except for, in some cases, like this Russian guy whom we pay. But all the people who run it are volunteers. It's a multilingual web presence, and we do not take any donations from families, although some of you have been nice enough to offer them. But this is because of what you all may remember in the 80s, that there were some